A married Alabama school lunch lady allegedly makes a shocking confession to a shocking act. She allegedly had sex with a student not just once, but twice. Now, you may be wondering, how does someone who works in a school in her 40s, seemingly happily married and a mom to 4 kids, end up in jail for having sex with a minor? We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. It is always shocking to see stories like this and to see how the life that someone projects on social media is not the reality of what apparently happens behind closed doors. This is Amy Wigginton. Many in her town of Rogersville, Alabama, are likely trying to process how she could be at the center of a sexual misconduct investigation because on Facebook, she identifies herself as a full-time mommy and wife, and she's active on social media, showing people that life. She posts picture after picture of her 4 children and her husband. Her profile may say full-time mommy and wife, but her job is at the Lauderdale County Schools in Alabama. According to the Lauderdale County High School's website, she works for the Children's Nutrition Program, or CNP. So in many ways, she's a lunch lady. She lives in the northern part of Alabama. It's near the Tennessee border, not far from Huntsville. Now, on social media, her life seemed, frankly, very regular. But police say there is much more to this story. Police confronted Wigginton just last week for having sex with a student. Local TV station WAAY looked at newly released court documents that show that when Wigginton was interviewed, she allegedly didn't deny it. The documents say that she waived her Miranda rights and came out with what happened. Wigginton allegedly admitted to having sex with the student 2 times. Once, police say, on March 7th, the other, March 31st. So all of this happening very recently. Now, it's unclear how police learned of the alleged sexual misconduct, but it does appear that they moved relatively quickly in this case, arresting her on April 4th. As with many of these stories, and we frankly do them a lot here at Law&Crime, you're probably wondering once again, how does it get to this point? How does something like this allegedly happen? How does a mom who is regularly posting about her kids and their horseback riding end up in a story like this? Now, we have yet to hear her side of the story, but here's her mugshot from when she was in the county jail. And at the time of this recording, she doesn't appear on the local jail's roster of inmates, so it does appear that she's bonded out. She was being held on a $100,000 bond. Now, she was charged with 2 counts of a school employee engaging in a sex act. There is an interesting dynamic in this story, and it has to do with consent laws in Alabama. Now, all we know about this student at this point is that they're under the age of 19. And in Alabama, the age of consent is 16. So you might wonder, for as shocking as all of this is what we're talking about actually a crime in the eyes of the law? Now, this is what we found on a Huntsville, Alabama defense attorney's website about the 2 charges that Wigginton is facing. This is what it says, quote, "A person commits the crime of a school employee having sexual contact with a student under the age of 19 years if he or she is a school employee and engages in sexual contact with a student regardless of whether the student is male or female. Consent is not a defense to a charge under this section." Now, the crime of school employee having sexual contact with a student is a Class C felony with a punishment of a minimum 1 year and 1 day in prison to 10 years in the state penitentiary with a maximum fine of $15,000. As for the school where Wigginton allegedly worked as a lunch lady, this is the statement that they sent out to media outlets after her arrest. Quote, "The Lauderdale County Board of Education is aware of the allegations and the employee has been placed on administrative leave. We will continue to cooperate with law enforcement officials and have no further comment on this matter." I want to thank our sponsor, Experian, for sponsoring this episode of On the Case. Experian can help you stay on top of your finances. April is Financial Literacy Month, and Experian is all about that all year long. The first step to taking control of your credit and your finances is to download the Experian app. The app has tons of free tools at your fingertips to help you take control of your financial life. We're talking your free FICO score, which can help you boost your FICO score instantly for free with Experian Boost. Free access to a marketplace of credit card, loan, and auto insurance options matched to you, and free credit monitoring with real-time alerts to keep you in the know on changes to your Experian credit profile. And let's not forget, you can easily freeze your Experian credit file for free in the app, helping protect protect you against identity theft. And make sure your finances are always in good shape with Experian. Use the link in the description, or you can scan the QR code to download the free app now. Results will vary, additional terms may apply, and you can see the App Store for details. Joining us now to talk more about this story is Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor who now investigates cases of sexual misconduct in schools. Dan, always great to have you on. These stories, they're always disturbing, especially for parents when you hear the allegations. In this case, she wasn't a teacher. It appears she worked in the cafeteria in some capacity. That certainly garnered a lot of attention. What about that stands out to you?
Usually kids are told to trust people at their schools. We tell little kids, listen to your teachers, do what they say, behave. And I think that a lot of times employees and teachers in the investigations I conduct, they use that kind of power position to unfortunately push physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, and then sometimes sexual boundaries with people who are underage, who may not be aware of how to say no to an authority figure. And I've seen these cases a lot. I started my career as a sex crimes prosecutor over 25 years ago, and unfortunately I see a lot of sexual misconduct at schools, and I investigate that every day. It's unfortunately an issue that I think we do need more awareness about, so I'm glad you're covering this type of story.
One thing that stood out to me in this case was, compared to some of the other ones that we've talked about, was how quickly it seemed this investigation moved. That the two alleged incidents, one was March 7th, another one was March 31st, and then she was arrested last week in the first week of April. So it's unclear at this time how police learned that this alleged misconduct was happening, but it seemed like they moved relatively quickly, and she allegedly admitted to it. How common is it that you see the person who's the suspect in this case come forward and say that they did it, which apparently she did in this case?
I see a mix. Sometimes people do admit to the allegations, but more often people either contest it or they minimize it. There may be an allegation of certain types of sexual interactions, and often I'll see someone responding to the allegations by saying, well, yes, we did have explicit communication, but we never actually did anything physical, or some type of explanation. And then it's up to the investigators, whether it's a school investigator or law enforcement, to really investigate and try to figure out what the true story is. But in this case, supposedly, according to law enforcement, there was a confession by the defendant. Then that may be because they either were confronted with evidence showing that there was some kind of sexual intercourse with these two people, or maybe the person just wanted to take responsibility for something that they felt bad about. There's different reasons that people offer confessions.
For you as a former prosecutor, when you have someone in a case like this who admits to something as shocking as allegedly sleeping with a student twice, is the fact that they came forward and actually just confessed to it, said they did it, instead of maybe making it a little bit more difficult on investigators, having to dig a little bit deeper to then prove in court that they did it, does that change how you try to prosecute a case?
It definitely affects sentencing, and that's both the sentencing recommendation from a prosecutor and also what a judge may do in sentencing. Acceptance of responsibility is often a factor. People have a right to contest charges. We don't want to take away the right to say that I didn't do something and go to trial. But the way the criminal justice system works, not just in sex crimes cases, but in other cases, that if someone takes responsibility early, admits to whatever the allegations are, then generally there is a feeling among prosecutors and judges that there's more. That's one factor to consider in mitigating a sentence. There are other factors, such as how egregious the specific conduct was, what are the wishes of the victim's family. A big decision is based on the perceived threat of this person to reoffend. So if the admission comes along with a statement of remorse and some kind of convincing explanation of why it wouldn't happen again. Obviously, we don't know if the person will always keep to that, but certainly that's different than someone who seems to show other signs that there are going to be an ongoing threat, that they're not taking any responsibility, they don't see anything wrong with what they did. So those are factors considered more in sentencing than in the decision to prosecute.
And part of this story too that I found fascinating was the idea of consent laws. So she is accused, what we know is the student's under the age of 19. It is illegal to, as a teacher, have relations with a student in Alabama. So that's not as much I guess, a question going forward of whether this is allegedly a crime. But in Alabama, the consent law is 16. How do you see consent laws playing into these types of cases?
Well, it's really important because different states have different ages of consent. You mentioned it's 16 here. In New York, it's 17. So that's one factor to consider in not only how to charge a case, but also what kind of sentence there should be if someone is convicted. A lot of states, such as here, have also made it illegal to have any kind of sexual interactions with someone who's a student. If someone's an employee, such as a teacher, or here a non-teacher employee, and the age of the person is definitely a factor to consider in sentencing. Also, there's a big difference between someone who's 18 who's having sex with an employee and someone who's 15. They're both wrong if they're students, but in terms of sentencing and how serious of a sanction the person should receive, the age of the person that they're with is a major factor in considering what the sentence should be.
Why is it that some states like Alabama have it as low as 16?
Well, I don't think that's that unusual. A lot of states have 16, as I mentioned. New York has 17. There might be an 18 in some place, but that's generally the range of age of consent laws. So I think that is within the realm of what is considered age of consent. But it varies by state for what the age of consent is.
Have you seen cases where a suspect believes what they're doing is actually legal because when you look at the age of consent, I mean, say if the victim in this case is 17 years old, that the suspect may have looked and didn't know the part of the law that said that if you're an employee at a school, it doesn't matter whatsoever. But have you seen those consent laws perhaps cloud the judgment of people who get accused in cases like this?
Yes, I have. And a very important legal principle there is that these crimes are what's called strict liability crimes. Strict liability crimes are crimes that are someone's liable for the criminal violation if they commit a certain act, that it's not based on their intent. So many crimes are based on intent, such as intentional murder, what did you intend, or intentional assault, what did you intend. With having sex with someone who's underage or a student, when that's illegal, it doesn't matter whether the person intended to be with someone underage, whether they knew they were underage, or whether they were aware that the person was a student, they were an employee, and therefore it was illegal. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, and in strict liability crimes, all that matters is whether the sex act occurred and were the people in a status that was illegal, such as age or being an employee and a student at the same school.
One thing, and I know you investigate cases like this regularly, and the ones that I've covered on this show, it is always so shocking how, like in this case, she's 41 years old. It appears that she is happily married. Just from what we've seen on social media, she has 4 kids. Seems like a very active mom. It does in some ways. It's almost cliche to say that this seems like the last person that you would think would be tied up in a case like this. How common is it that it is the type of person that you would never expect to be the suspect in a case like this?
Well, one thing I've learned in many, many investigations is you never know what's going on behind the scenes in someone's life. And I think we all know that. I mean, we've all
Yeah.
experienced tough times in life, stressful times in life that we're not always publicly revealing. It's almost comical sometimes how everyone puts positive images out on social media to show that they're happy with their family. And we know that people aren't generally posting about problems they have. So there might have been some marital issues. A lot of these cases that I investigate, it's about power and control, that someone either feels powerless in other parts of their lives, and this is a place they can exert power and control over someone else and abuse that power. So there's many different reasons why this might happen.
And there's always questions after the fact about, for the school board, for the school. How do you hire someone that ends up allegedly having sex with a student? And then you ask yourself, what could they have seen in hiring this person? And at least from the outside, it doesn't look like there were any warning signs. What are some of the warning signs that you believe schools should look into further to potentially stop some of these cases from happening?
Sure, and that's a great question because there's two major parts to an investigation like this. One is what did this person do, and then what did the school do or fail to do that could have prevented this. So a background check when someone's hired is really important, looking into any criminal background they have, civil litigation backgrounds that they might have, their media presence, social media presence. You mentioned that. So those are really important things to do before hiring someone. But if someone's never been arrested for something like this or sued or posted online or no one's ever written online anything about that person, it really is hard for or nearly impossible for a school to know that someone might do something like this. I think another thing a school needs to do is if there are warning signs early to focus on those warning signs and pursue them and talk to people. So sometimes before there's actual sexual interactions between people, there's boundary blurring behavior or text messages, social media interactions. And a school that is observant and taking these reports seriously can follow up and hopefully prevent it from getting to an escalated situation of actual sex between people.
Yeah, what type of oversight, and maybe in this case, there were oversight measures in place because it does appear that that it moved relatively quickly from the alleged incidents happening and then an arrest less than a month later. What are some of the oversights that can be in place to prevent these types of stories from happening?
Well, one is having really clear rules in your school for employees and teachers about what is appropriate interactions with students and what is inappropriate. A lot of schools have requirements that staff, teachers, employees should not engage with students outside of school hours unless it's about a school issue. And also, we want to encourage people out of school to speak up if they hear or see something. A lot of people may see, oh, this employee seems like they're having inappropriate boundary blurring behavior with the student, but I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to rock the boat here. And I think having a culture that encourages people, if you see something like that, no, you're not going to face retaliation if you step up and say something. We want to hear about this. We're going to look into it. That kind of culture leads to reporting that can prevent situations like this. And some schools have a culture where people just keep quiet and keep to themselves, even though they see things, because they're afraid of retaliation or they just don't want to rock the boat in any way. So it's important, and that comes from the top, how you set that culture.
Yeah, because over your career, have you seen the culture change? I mean, I think that there's far more awareness of these cases, especially with the internet and how quickly people spread these stories from happening. But what was the culture like when you first started your career at many schools
Sure.
in places?
There's been major changes across society, and especially with schools, about how to deal with these issues. Every school now should have a policy clearly talking about appropriate boundary blurring behavior, how that's prohibited, and also just talking about different types of sexual misconduct, what is not allowed. 25 years ago when I started, a lot of schools did not have policies in place. Not only do you need policies, but you need clear reporting, so someone who's a student or an employee knows where to go. A lot of times people see something that is problematic, but they don't know who to talk to about it. So communicating that. And also people who experience sexual misconduct, as is alleged here, they've been emboldened over the last few years to speak up, to say something. There's often a feeling of misplaced self-blame and shame for experiencing something like this, and that still exists today. But I think there's more of a acceptance and encouragement in society to step up and not be blamed not to blame the victim the way there was several years ago.
I think in some cases too, where you have a male suspect, often that person is very quickly labeled a predator in that term, and many times that label fits. You don't see that term, at least I feel, labeled on female suspects as much. Is that something you see? And is that even in a case like this, where seemingly a mom, a wife, seems to be living a very normal life, but then is accused of something as heinous as this?
Yes, that's changed somewhat, but definitely that's still an issue. There's a situation where a lot of people in society see a male student and a female employee, and there's kind of this like wink, wink, oh, good luck to that student. He's lucky. I wish that happened to me. I hear people say that to me when
Yeah.
I'm prosecuting cases like this. And I think, unfortunately, we don't see male students as victims the same way we do as female students as victims. And it's really important that we do, because a male student can still experience severe trauma from something like this, having this violation occur to them at a very young, impressionable age, and that can derail just a healthy growth on their part. So I think society is changing, but I still hear that when people know that I'm investigating cases like this, there's definitely a different response when I say there's a male student and a female teacher, as opposed to a female student and a male teacher, or some other combination where I think there's more of an instinctual being really outraged about what happened.
Because I think about also, let's just say the student in this case within the age of consent in Alabama, a 17-year-old, let's say, we know they're under the age of 19. How common is for them to experience trauma as opposed to, and we've seen some horrifying cases of elementary school children or middle school children who have been sexually abused, but here you have a high schooler who may be in college in a couple of years. How common is it to see that an incident like this, which allegedly happened, have an impact long term on their mental health?
Definitely, and I've seen that a lot. I've had cases where people have reported things about teachers later, much later. I had a case where I investigated a couple of years ago where a student from the 80s who was a teenager was allegedly molested by a male teacher, and he reported it 30 years later because this had been an ongoing trauma in his life. When someone experiences any type of sexual misconduct, that can be traumatizing, but I think even more so when someone's at a young age, there's a formative experience for them to have someone with power and control over them take advantage of that power and sexually abuse them. And that's something that people deal with for years and years, if not the rest of their lives.
She, according to Alabama law, could face, I think, at minimum a year in prison, maximum 10 years in prison, as well as a $15,000 fine. Um, and I'm sure also potentially could be on the sex offender registry. What have you seen to be effective punishment in cases like this?
It really varies on some of the factors that we talked about before, such as the details of what happened, how many times it happened, the age of the person who is involved as a student, the acceptance of responsibility. You're at a minimum going to have some kind of, I would expect, some sex offender probation where someone's going to be monitored. There very well may be incarceration for these acts. Sometimes when someone makes an admission, it's because they're working out some type of plea agreement where they're going to avoid a long prison sentence. So those are some of the factors that are considered by judges and prosecutors. There's no specific sentence that goes along with a crime like this. It really depends on a variety of factors like that.
Just looking at the allegations, and we'll see how the story plays out. There's still a lot that we don't know, but how likely in cases like this would she end up on a sex offender registry?
With any conviction, there should be a sex offender registry requirement if there's any conviction of having sex with a student who's underage or a student when someone's an employee. That is generally required in cases like this, even if the person doesn't face incarceration.
And for as much as these stories, and whenever a teacher, or in this case a cafeteria worker, is arrested, all the major news outlets pick it up. Certainly the local news picks it up. Their name is in headlines, and it feels like just even the threat of that would be such a major deterrent for another person in a school who thinks that they might do something like this. Yet we continue to see these stories happening. Are these stories happening more, or are we just more aware that these stories are happening?
I think it's the latter. I think we're more aware because when I started my career, again, over 25 years ago as a sex crimes prosecutor, I saw these cases, unfortunately, a lot, and I still do now. But back then, if something happened and I was investigating it, not everyone was aware of it the way they are now. There was no social media. People weren't able to spread information. People weren't able to report it as easily and in a public way. So I don't think that it's happening more now, but there's more awareness and more people find out about it, such as someone posts a news article and it's easily spread worldwide in seconds. So that's something that's very different. And hopefully that does deter some people. The flip side of that is that also when someone's innocent until proven guilty, it puts their name out there in a way
Yeah.
that may really hurt them for life. And people they are innocent until proven guilty. And once your name is all over social media and the media about having done something like this, it's hard to recover from that. So that's the negative side of the publicity. The positive side is it does embolden people to report things, and it does hopefully act as a deterrent to other people. So I think there's a good side and a bad side to the fact that these cases are so easily promoted across media and social media now in a way that just didn't happen when I started my career.
And for you, now I know that you're an author, and these incidents in schools, it's what you write about. You have a book coming out this summer. What should people know about that?
Sure, yeah, I have a novel called Open Bar. It's my second novel. Both of them are about sexual misconduct allegations, and this new novel takes place at a school. Similar situation as this. People can find me on Substack. I write a lot about fiction writing and these types of issues.
Yeah, and it's such an important topic, because we see these stories all too often. Dan Shore, always great to have you on Law and Crime.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to talk with you.
That will do it for this episode of On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.